Dallas, high above 3773's Broadway. This is a live edition of the Jake Feinberg Show. Coming to you on Power Talk. Thank you so much for making us part of your day today, wherever you're tuning in all over the world. And without further ado, it's an honor to bring back a guy who came up in a time in music when individual sound was paramount. It had a lot to do with the communal aspect of in the studio, musicians being allowed to create music on their terms and not being meddled with by producers and people who, or bean counters, but they were able to actually collectively put together a musical voice that spoke to the social consciousness of the time and spoke to their own individual heartbeat and their own individual love. And thank God for that, because we are now in an elongated pause, and if I was a betting man, I'd say that the return of communal, liberating, live music in person may never come back, and I worry deeply about this. And it's such a high honor to bring back such a gentleman and a great musician, Jimmy Owens. Welcome back to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thank you very much. And I hope you're definitely wrong that live music is not going to be coming back. It looks very, very bad.
The reason, and I want to be clear, there's a lot of independent. Listen, I put this quote, this question up on Facebook, but it didn't get a lot of attention. But you already see that there are certain parts of the country that are more than willing to open back up, costs be damned, and I really believe we'll be seeing live sports with customers in attendance in this calendar year, and I don't know if there's going to be enough government funding to support the independent music venues. Well, let me just ask you this. Do you remember, not that you live there, but I remember talking to Phil Ranlin, the great trombone player, and
right.
It wasn't a virus, but you had the riots in Detroit, and what was the response of the government? There was an infusion of money for the arts. There was an infusion of money for music. There was an understanding that was considered to be a constructive thing for the community.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and even though the spiritual music that you and Jimmy Heath and Stanley Cowell and Gary Bartz and all the cats play, even though it's unquantifiable, a musician was still looked at as a viable profession. And that's what worries me today, is that in this quantifiable time, music is seen as a musician's gift to the world. So forgetting about prognostications, I actually wanted to talk to you about that and how you try to implore people that are not, we're preaching to the choir, but what would you say to people about music as a profession?
Wow. Well, the first thing I would say is that to be able to perform this music that we call jazz is one of the most wonderful things in the world, all over the world, whenever it's performed. Now, for the group of musicians who, in an earlier day, months earlier, it would travel all over the world to perform, it's one of the greatest feelings when that audience gets involved with the music like the musicians are involved in listening to the music, in responding to the music. That's what makes you being a professional musician feel great. That's basically what I could say. Now,
that's spot on, but that's coming from I'm saying, where is the incentive to say, I mean, we can go back in the history and say they took it out of the schools, and then you started to have pre-programmed radio where all of a sudden record companies were dictating what would be played instead of, what people wanted to actually hear. But in terms of people, I mean, I've heard people say, hey, and if, again, this is pre-coronavirus, but if you dig live music and you dig improvisational instrumental live music, because that word jazz really bothers me now, then people with big pockets are going to have to pony up, and they're going to have to create venues in order for people to cultivate their own sound, because the only reason you guys were able to create your individual sounds is because there were just so many venues to play at. I mean, that's the truth. There's just
that's very true. Yes, that's agreed.
So the question is this: in your mind, not necessarily you, but if you were talking to legislators about the need for funding, they're like, oh, the arts. Oh, well, so too bad for the arts. They're just. I mean, why don't people get it? I mean, to me, this is the time right now, before the spine breaks completely, when there has to be a all-out effort to cultivate live instrumental improvisational music. Or, like I said in my intro, I don't know if it'll ever come back.
Well, there are a number of clubs in New York, and I'm sure across the United States this holds up, that may never come back. This whole period of 3-4 months or more may not allow them to ever exist again. I know there are some clubs in New York that were on shaky ground. And if you look at those clubs that are on shaky ground, 3, 4, 5, 6 months of being closed, having to pay rent, and even if they can't pay rent, at some point they're going to have to pay back rent. Those particular places may not come back. And it could be well-known jazz clubs or concert halls, places where musicians have traditionally performed. And we're going to need, I was on the telephone speaking to a musician friend earlier, and we talked about the fact that there is a possibility that many of these clubs and performance places are not going to come back after this virus is over.
Right.
And even if it does come back, then the public may not be the people who come out like they used to come out.
That's what I'm saying is this, because we haven't talked in a minute, but I've been on the road a lot the last couple of years, being healed by the natural vibrations of the stage sound, not necessarily in, I hate using labels, but just in the live musical context. And I really wonder now, non-essential travel to see live music at this point, with the chaos and uncertainty, is it worth it? It's not the issue of whether musicians want to get back up on the bandstand, or it's a matter of the venues themselves, but also whether there'll be a patronage to go see it. But you're not a listen. We really need to get down to the nitty gritty here, because I interviewed Ellis Marsalis about 5 years ago, and we just lost him. Okay, and
yes.
He said some striking stuff to me. He had a band with Harold Batiste and Ed Blackwell called the American Jazz Quintet, and they formed a record label in New Orleans called AFO, All for One, and they never and the cats that never accepted them or let them play were the historically black colleges. They didn't want the blues. They didn't want the jazz there. And, I wanted to ask you, in terms of your point of view, has the patronage of jazz ever been, because obviously there was, Minton's there was Minton's and there was, Small's Paradise, and there were places that adhered to the aesthetic of this music we call jazz. But is it fair to say that people of a particular skin color, black skin color, never fully appreciated their own people's music?
Well, that's very true in many respects. And as the music moved on from Charlie Parker, and as the music industry, grew larger and larger, and making of stars in that particular part of the industry called popular music, the Little Richards, the Presleys, people like that, we lost a lot of public who were the listeners to J-A-Z-Z music. And as radio grew and promoted that kind of music, they didn't promote J-A-Z-Z as much. And that has made a big difference in the kinds of audiences we attract and the kind of venues that we can play in, because now we're so used to them presenting a Luther Vandross type of artist that will fill up a stadium.
Exactly.
Whereas a Jimmy Heath type of artist wouldn't be able to fill up that stadium, and that has made a big difference in the lives of musicians. And this is partly why many of the great musicians have gone into education, because just performing all over the world wasn't happening as much as before.
You made some profound statements. The idea that you could have essentially a jazz festival with no, in our mind, jazz.
No jazz.
No jazz. Right. So that word has become so perverted. I want to read this excerpt to you. I don't have it queued up in audio. I did a few interviews with Jimmy Heath before he passed away, and I want to read this to you and then get your thoughts. He said, "I went to Africa, Dakar, Senegal in 1980. I was really shocked because I had been brainwashed by Western media. Their depiction of Tarzan and what the Africans did, how obnoxious and loud my people were. I'm in Dakar with 80,000 people. We're playing in this stadium. Dizzy's there, Kenny Clark, my brother Percy, Sonny Fortune, and Jimmy Owens. A lot of jazz musicians who went over there for an independent celebration of Senegal. The 80,000 people were so quiet in this stadium, I could not believe it. I'm brainwashed too. That we're ignorant and loud and obnoxious. That's the impression that was left on me being in the United States. The only time the crowd raised their voices was when the music started to play. Then I realized that we're not like we say." Can you riff on that experience? Because I've talked to, and I'm not sure, maybe you were part of the
That
move?
was the Feast of Independence, the celebration of Senegal's 20th year of independence, 1980.
Exactly. So my question though is, did Leopold single? Were you with Max even earlier than that on that trip to educate the people of Africa, or was that your first time to
No,
the motherland?
no, that was my first time, and actually that was my first time in Africa.
Can you talk about, this is what I love to talk about, because it's this idea of what was most spiritually and what enlightening for you about the motherland?
Well, what was wonderful is, first of all, that was a festival that was presented by Club Med. And all of those musicians that you named and others were part of this festival that went on for about 6 or 7 months, where they brought musicians over. And the musicians played at Club Med. And they would play every night or every other night. And the particular 2 weeks or 3 weeks that I was there, they had these huge festivals in the stadium, Demba Diop Stadium, that sat like 35,000 people in a circle.
My, that's insane.
And they listened to the music, but they got involved with the music because every night that we would play, now I was with my quartet, okay? Jimmy, Dizzy, Percy, Sonny Fortune, Clifford Jordan, they were all individuals.
Wow.
They had Kenny Clark there from Paris. So when we played as a jam session type situation for this festival. But then my group played, Kenny Clark's group that he brought from Paris played, and the people listened because every night at the clubs, at Club Med, they would broadcast All Africa to All Africa Radio. So the people in Africa could hear this music. And for this Feast of Independence in the stadium, many people came from other parts of Africa to go to this concert. And the concert was packed. And Senghor was there. We got a chance to meet him. He appreciated the music.
What stood out to me is Club Med. It was a corporate-backed ongoing musical festival supported by corporation. So here's the blunt question. Pre-coronavirus, how has the significance of music changed? Again, we're talking about a festival in Africa, but I just remember, Art Blakey, it was before my time. I was born in 1978, but he used to say, it was my job to wash away the dust of everyday life for the patrons that would come in to see my music. I don't need to tell you, being somebody who played with so many amazing artists and leaders, that there was the significance of music in our culture in a certain period of our history was vital for spirit. Mm-hmm. Okay? And now it's about, you talk about cats moving into academia. And it, I was just transcribing my interview with Ernie Watts, and Ernie's talking about Berkeley, which was known as the Schillinger School. That was originally for already established professional musicians who wanted time off the road, wanted to learn a different instrument, wanted to learn some music, but they were already professionals. Now you have a situation where it's the academy, and you have people, it's very international, people coming to get a degree in melodic improvisation, otherwise known as jazz, but they have no professional acumen. So meaning that the idea of just being a professional musician is, I just wonder in your mind how the significance of music has changed in our culture.
Well, I mean, first off, because of the huge amount of jazz education in the United States and the amount of people trying to learn how to play this music, we have to face a point of reality that of the 300 students in a school studying jazz, about 275 of them are never going to be professional musicians. They're never going to be able to deal with all that's necessary to be professional musicians, to have and to build longevity. The few who are going to fight and build a career for themselves and longevity are going to be the ones that we start to know. And
well, let me just stop you there, because this is important. Longevity as being an originalist, or longevity because of conformity to what corporate America thinks is going to fill seats?
No. Longevity for being a professional jazz artist.
Got it.
That's what I'm speaking about.
I guess in the sense of, because what I'm saying is that you go back to one of your compadres, Charles Mingus. I don't believe anybody was going to tell Mingus the kind of music he was going to play in order to have longevity. He was going to play Mingus music to have longevity, but now,
right,
in order to be a jazz,
he practiced to be at the height of that music that he was going to create, and that's what gave him longevity. Why do we know Louis Armstrong? Why do we know Ella Fitzgerald? Because their skill level was so high that that's what gave them longevity. Their skill level. Now, we're getting to a point where we have musicians going to these academies across the world and learning how to play jazz, but many times there are big holes in there. If you can play 5,000 notes in these 4 beats, you're a hell of a musician. Well, that's not what the music is about.
You're darn right.
So what we're hearing from too many people is da 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 that goes on forever. And there's never any rest. There's never any statement. And those particular musicians who know how to make rest and to make a statement are the ones that usually bring an audience in to listen to them. Now, after this virus, I hope that there are going to be enough places where an audience will want to come to listen to some of these great musicians. And as we lose so many of them every day, and I mean, I can say for myself, I don't feel that many of them are being replaced. You know?
They're not. This is so important, and I need you to talk about this, is that everyone, I've done 2,000 radio interviews, Jimmy, since I last talked to you. And this is the thing that's vexing to me, and I need you to talk about it, and this is Gary Bartz's theory. I think it's incredibly salient. But what's happening now is, I mean, I don't want to be overly simplistic, but you guys learned the music by ear before you learned to sight read. You learn to play tunes in every key. You go back to Louis or Charlie Parker. Bird was listening to the radio and learning to play every song in every key. As a result, everybody kind of had to be autodidacts, and you kind of came up with your own original sound. And now you have people going to the academy who have learned to sight read the music before they've learned how to hear the music. So therefore, their ears are locked. They can't hear as deep as you guys did. And as a result, they either come out sounding like their professor or some sort of homogenization of sound. The track we let in with, I played for you last time, it has been seared into my memory. It's called Baptismal. Joe Zawinul. It is so unstructured and beautiful. You play one note at about the 2:30 mark, or like a little bit of like a couple of notes. It's just like a little bit of a theme. And I'm not sure if you even come back in and solo for any extended period of time, but it was just that classic vibe, the essence. To me, that is the essence of jazz. Not everybody needs to take a long solo. Not everybody needs to just blow and show technique. It's this visceral edge. And a lot of it came from feel. It came more from feel than yes. So I want you to just talk about
it didn't come from academia.
Right.
Okay? And this is one of the major problems with academia, that there are not always enough very qualified musicians who are teaching the elements of this music, that many of these students can't hear their teacher talk about what Ben Webster can do and how he did it. Now let me hear you do that kind of stuff instead of da 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 for the next 15 minutes. Okay? It's the essence of the music that many times has to get passed on from those people who can stand in front of an audience and enthuse that audience. Many people who are enthuse that audience with what they play on their instruments. And it's those people like the Gary Bartzes, like the Sonny Fortunes, because Sonny Fortune was there also.
Absolutely. And he was there.
Yeah. It's people like Jimmy Heath and Jimmy Cobb and Harold Mayburn, who were the epitome of giving forth their knowledge to this student. And those students who listened to that and learned, like Antonio Hart, those students are the ones who can usually stand up there and enthuse that listening audience with what they play. And that's what keeps this music alive. And that's what, unfortunately, has slowly but surely made certain parts of this music die.
I was just I called Reggie Workman the other day to try to set up a second interview, and he mentioned you, and he didn't even know Jimmy had passed, so I told him he was sort of blown away by it and floored by it. But, what you're getting at is the ability to inspire. It's about having a story to tell, and if you are, there were a lot of stories to tell back when you were first coming up, and it's because of the fierce individuality of the leaders that that you were part of, and they,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't care if it was Max Roach or Mingus or Miles or whoever. I mean, it goes on and on and on.
Mm-hmm.
It was, the idea was that, this is the thing, Jimmy. When I listen to this music that I love so much from this time period, there's a sense of urgency to the music, and what it says to me is that you guys were on the bandstand so much in that live, in the moment, visceral, expressing your true emotions in the moment, and your bandmates letting you do that, that it was so easy to go into a studio with a producer and an engineer who said, okay, well, this is Jimmy's date, or this is Julian's date, or have at it. And you guys were able to replicate that live urgency on the record. It's so
Right.
evident there. And today, if all you're doing is learning how to notate these Charlie Parker solos, or you need to demonstrate some kind of facility of somebody, it's just a huge comping effort, as opposed to saying, be yourself. Because here's the thing. My feeling is, if you're going to have, in today's world, in melodic improvisation, if you're going to have longevity, then you need to sound like somebody else. Don't be yourself, because you ain't getting, I mean, to be a creative jazz musician, a really organic, urgent jazz musician without an already recognizable marquee name seems to have gone by the wayside. Charlie Persip said that the only way that he told me that the only way to have a rebirth of musical vocabulary is to have a complete disintegration of civilization. I don't know. But to me, it's like, if you're selling somebody at a concert hall to pack them in, it's going to, because the people that have the money to afford it can say, okay, he sounds like this, or this is like who he's channeling, as opposed to him being himself, when every record and every person that I love, from Kenny Barron to you to everybody, was just being themselves, because you had that freedom, and you might also sell a few records because of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, like that freedom that you're talking about has come from so much experience that many of these people who have graduated from these institutions in the last 4 or 5 years don't have a place to even get that experience. So they're getting the experience on with their college mates. You see, we had Art Blakey and Max Roach and Charles Mingus.
Yeah.
We had those people, Horace Silver, to play with, that gave us much more experience than their college mates could, who they just graduated with. And it's the wise young musicians who have to take what came before and figure out how to make that something of today. To take what Ben Webster, Coleman Hawkins, Sonny Rollins, Miles Davis, Dizzy Gillespie did, and make that into the modern music of today. The feeling that had to go with that music from that period, to infuse the music that these young people are playing today with that spirit. And once they become attuned to that importance of that spirit having to be given every time they perform, that's when they're going to see, 1, longevity, 2, popularity. And if they don't have that spirit, that just makes the music less viable to more people. I mean, I recall when people were saying, well, I like this young trumpet player, Wynton Marsalis, but I don't get any feeling from him.
Exactly.
And once he started to learn about projection of emotion every time he played, it made a difference for people who were listening to him.
Let me ask you something. Do you remember the first time after you and Kenny Barron cut that album on Atlantic in '68?
Yeah.
Do you remember getting radio play?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We got
because what I'm saying is that tell me about that, because when I interviewed Bob Porter a while ago from Prestige, and there were clubs in Newark, and then the cats would go to Van Gelder's, and ultimately there was AM radio that was playing 12-minute Charlie Earlin cuts, and I know they were playing 10-minute Jimmy Owens and Kenny Barron cuts in freeform radio. So you talk about them getting together with their college buddies. It's not all that dissimilar to you guys getting together with your buddies and your peers, but you were actually going in, creating content, and that was being disseminated into the ears of regular people. So that is something that is also, because we are saturated with material, the question is, if Jimmy Owens was a young buck today, how would you cut through the morass of content while still being singular and authentic to the history of the music?
Well, I mean, we have to look at the artists who have done that. The Jeremy Peltz, okay?
Yep.
He is cut through because he is equipped to do that from the standpoint of giving forth from himself every time he plays. Now, there are a number of other instrumentalists, Wycliffe Gordon, that does this every time he plays. I mean, I can listen to Wycliffe when I did my album, The Monk Project. That's the epitome of Duke Ellington.
Right.
Because what did I do? I wrote the music for each of those people. I wrote for those particular people because I knew they could deliver the kind of spirit that I was trying to make in doing Thelonious Monk music. Now, that is, like I say, that's a certain level of professionalism, of experience, of trial and error, of paying certain amount of dues. You see, I teach at the New School. I came down hard more than 10 years ago. I've been there 30 years teaching part-time. I came down real hard more than 10 years ago because I said, hey, none of these kids can play the blues. We have to insist that they learn how to play the blues. And those particular students who learned how to play the blues are out here in this world now playing well. Those students who didn't learn how to play the blues, you can hear it every time they put their instruments in playing position.
I want you, this is so important because, well, first of all, I need you to talk about this. This is mind-blowing because that's the most intoxicating thing about, Clyde Stubblefield was James Brown's drummer. He was Bobby Blue Bland's drummer. And he could also play jazz. When Wilton Felder was in the Nighthawks and they were before the Crusaders and they were touring around, all the blues guys could play jazz standards. It'd be like it was unbelievable. The blues was right alongside the jazz. So what I wanted you to talk about is your recollection of this session that you were on with Junior Wells. This was an album that Samuel Charters produced in '68, and it was you and Clark Terry, Tom McIntosh, Donald Fagen, believe it or not, from Steely Dan was on saxophone. But I mean,
I don't remember that date.
but did you go to Chicago and play with any of the blues cats?
Well, I mean, every time I was on the road, I was always going someplace once I was there. So when I was in Chicago, I was listening to Chicago blues players when I was not working. I remember being there with Hank Crawford. And because he was a blues player, there were blues players that came to where we were playing to listen to us. I mean, that's the essence of the giving of this music. Once you can express yourself with 3 or 4 notes, that's really skill level, the highest of skill level.
Jimmy, you came down hard 10 years ago. I applaud you about the Cats, the classicalized, sterile nature of just being a jazzer and not having the blues in that vocabulary. I remember Pat Martino saying he walked into a bathroom and saw John Coltrane take out his teeth. Okay, how many people do we talk about, Mingus included, who died broke? How many people had substance issues and were hooked on junk? I mean, that's the blues. They were living the blues. You can't teach the blues to cats that are coming in from, and more power to them. Great, they're very.
It's not teaching the blues, Jake.
What is it?
It's not about teaching the blues. It's about teaching how to bring forth from your inner self the highest level of projection of your emotion. And if you have built emotion, then it will come into your playing. I mean, why did Billie Holiday, she had to bring this out? Now, a lot of these students don't have lots of emotional situations, but they still have emotion within themselves.
Right.
So I tell one trumpet player that I'm teaching that when I gave him Body and Soul to play, he played it da 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 da. I said, man, what the fuck does that mean? It don't mean nothing. Now play it for someone you love. Think about someone that you love. Is it your mother? Is it your father? Your sister or your brother? Or your best friend? Now, play that melody for them, to them. And it got better, and it is getting better every time he plays.
That is a beautiful. I'm so glad. I mean, you're appealing to the primordial. Jimmy, let me ask you this question: How did you learn to drop from your head to your heart to what I call the primordial gut and create that spiritual music that you're talking about? How did it happen for you?
Well, it happened because I listened to the music when I was 10, 11, 12, 13 years old. I mean, it was Miles Davis, it was Clifford Brown, Billie Holiday. All of these people that my father played the music in the house. Charlie Parker. And all of that stuff had an effect on me. And then by the time that I was talking about wanting to play this music professionally, 14 years old, I had to deal with emotion. That was what I heard on the records that I was transcribing all the time. It wasn't just about the notes. It was about me playing the notes with them on this record and sounding and trying to sound like they did emotionally. You know, unfortunately, in most of the schools across the United States that's teaching this music, the word emotion doesn't exist. It's not even mentioned in a 15-week course. Everything is about technical ability. And that has affected the music in a negative way.
That's amazing to me that those professors that are not dealing with the emotive qualities of this music should be relieved of their duties.
Oh, most definitely.
It's ridiculous.
But those are the people I'm talking about that could not stand in front of the audience and enthuse the audience.
Right.
Like Art Blakey did, and like every musician in Art Blakey's band, or whoever, Horace Silver. Every musician in Horace Silver's band had to be able to stand up there and enthuse those people with what he or she was playing, what they were creating at that moment. And that was the reason why they were with that particular band. And when they left that band, they knew for a fact that that's what they had to build on, making people feel this music.
This is another important issue. I just know that everything that I listen to, I don't care if it was Shelly Manne or Joe Chambers or Freddie Waits or whoever, it doesn't matter. The African, you want to say that jazz is a fusion of European harmonies with African rhythms, that's fine. But you talk about Art Blakey, the rhythms, Elvin, this was not, this was individual rhythmic stuff. And then I remember James Gadsden telling me, or maybe it was Mike Clark, one of these guys was in the studio in the mid-'70s, and the producer said, just play straight beats. Just play straight beats like that pop hit. We don't really want to hear the individual drumming. We just want you to play what the last pop hit was. Did that happen? And not necessarily. I remember talking to Steve Swallow, and he was in a session in '69 with Gary Burton. And again, jazz, one reason it was so amazingly emotive for you with your dad is that Clifford Brown stuff, it was really popular music in America at that time. But right. in the late 60s, it was losing popularity, and guys like Joel Dorn were trying to make it a little more funky or throw some funk and blues, whatever, rhythm and blues in there. And, Swallow brought an original tune, and Arif Mardin came out and was like, no, we're going to play it like this. And Swallow got real surly because it was taking away his interpretation of his own music. And all of a sudden you had people who might have been great producers or engineers, and they could mic the studio, they could mic it great and make it sound good. But then the creative control was taken away from the musician themselves, and I'm wondering in the 70s if that ever happened to you.
No, I have to say, I worked with Arif numerous times, and I never saw him do that.
He's not a great example. I'm just saying that, like, okay. in terms of the rhythm, I can see it with my parents too. This the emotion comes from the rhythm, the rhythmic base that's created, the foundation that's created, so that you guys can blow over the top. But if it's all in if it's become, I just feel jazz, I hate the word, It's become classicalized. I don't hear those rhythms anymore. I don't hear individual rhythmic patterns. And I just, when in the 70s, when they started to gear more towards pop music, and it was the idea of saying just play straight beats. Did you ever, like, did that ever come into your zeitgeist ever? And was that ever something that, because I just feel at that point they were stripping the authenticity from somebody's actual ability to.
Well, I don't think a weak musician would go along with stuff like that.
Well, they got to sing for their supper, though.
But never a strong musician. I mean, when Herbie Hancock recorded his first record or his second record, I mean, he knew what he wanted this music to sound like, and if there was a producer who was going to comment, he was not going to comment on a level of music with Herbie, because what Herbie was going to bring out was going to be the highest quality of that performance, that song.
He might not be he might not be the best example because he continues to be a bit of an avatar.
I mean, there could be other people also that may not be as strong as a Herbie Hancock in knowing what they wanted to do, and maybe that their music was overshadowed by a producer. I don't know if that is the case. I have never had that happen. I mean, because I had planned the album in my mind. I mean, when Kenny and I got together and talked, we had an idea of what our album was going to be about. You Had Better Listen, 1967. So we knew what was going to happen. So Joel Dawn couldn't tell us to play something some other way.
Right. Well, I mean, you were somewhat fearless in your artistic point of view, and you had the experience that they knew. I just know that, like, the stuff you did on Polydor with the late, great Chris White, Billy,
Yep.
Kenny Barrett. I mean,
No
that
escaping
was no escaping it. An album that is almost impossible to find right now. I mean, it's someone said here, how can you escape from this groovalicious cause and effect musical jam session? That is what it's about. Then you go over to the mid 70s, late 70s, the drum machine, disco. I guess I'm more interested in saying. So we talk about people that are, like the piano is a percussive instrument. It's part of the rhythm section. But these drummers, man, were uncompromisable. And all the hits that came out, I don't care what it was. Bernard Purdie, I mean, he told me, Bernard said, the best thing that drummers could do is stop wearing in-ear monitors. Because when you do that, you lose all concept of dynamics. And the only tunes that ever became hits had huge dynamics. I mean, this is just stuff that I have been marinating in for so long. And it's so visceral. The rhythms that were, and the great Roy Haynes and Jimmy Cobb, these guys were driving the train. And I just feel that more and more now, I mean, obviously you go in a rock setting or something like that, and it's, someone could just be playing the drums and it's just, they're yelling at you and pounding them, and it's just not cool. But there was an aesthetic with the rhythm that was acceptable to be pressed on vinyl, and radio, and played on radio, which was the outlets for people to take stuff in those days. And I don't hear the individualism in drumming today or rhythm today that I think is essential for the aesthetic of melodic improvisation. But that's just my opinion. We have a game on this program called Name That Voice. I'm going to put this voice in for you and come back and talk about it.
Okay.
as a black man in America, there's nothing new about that. The only thing that's new about white cops getting off when they kill somebody black, because obviously they don't kill too many white people. Okay,
No.
White cops don't shoot too many white guys.
No.
So the difference is now what we're experiencing is even having a film of it
Right.
doesn't make a difference.
That's it,
Now, that
exactly.
started with Rodney King. Okay, Rodney King, you saw the footage. Oh man, they got him this time, and those guys got off. Now we see white cops who can murder you in cold blood, okay, on film, and white people won't convict him in a jury. A white cop killing a black person. You see? So we saw the Eric Gardner in New York when he says, "I can't breathe." That's on tape. But what's also on tape, and most people don't run the tape long enough to see, that unit, that crazy cop unit that snatches a guy because he was selling Lucy's in front of a store. Those are, for those that don't know, those are like one-off cigarettes. You can buy 2 or 3 cigarettes.
Right, exactly.
He ends up dying. The person that was head of that unit when she walks up is a black woman, sergeant. Nobody brings that up. And it's a collusion. It's just police. But I'm saying the difference now, people are seeing footage. The guy in New Orleans, when the cop was on top of him with the gun in his chest. Of course, we're always reaching for a gun. It might have been a fucking comb. Excuse me, I don't know. You can edit that out. It might have been a comb, but
Yeah.
you get me riled up now because that's real. To see.
Jimmy, you want to take a guess at who that is?
I have no idea who that is.
I love Jimmy Owens so much.
He's speaking the facts.
Well, he is Jimmy Heath's son. That was my interview with Mtume.
Oh, that's Mtume?
From July,
Okay.
but that was from July of 2017 on the heels of Philandro Castillo being shot in his car in Minnesota. And I'm not going to sit here and start getting on a soapbox about how distraught I feel, because I do. But I also recognize the privilege that I have, and in one way I feel that I can fulfill my purpose in life is to give back through this show. And I just would like you to talk about, most importantly, the history that we are not taught about in our culture. And let me give you an example. I mean, like the idea that John Brown, as an abolitionist, is always talked about, right? He's always talked about as the courageous one. Why? Because he's white. It doesn't talk about all the other people that were that led rebellions as well, that were black. We've never been taught the true history. And if there was something, I give you the floor on this because we live in this age of modernization. Even with video proof, people get off. They keep their pensions. It never happened. And you can riff on it any way you want. The original sin of our country is slavery.
What is very basic is that America is still a very racist country in many, many parts of this country. There are many people who are filled with hate and racism. There is no way possible that you can tell me that policeman who has his knee on someone's neck, who is handcuffed down on the ground with this cop's knee on his neck, and them saying, well, get up and get in the car. Get up and get in the car. There's no way possible that you can tell me that he is not filled with racism.
Absolutely.
And the fact that 3 other policemen are standing there not saying anything. You hear the public saying stuff, but the 3 policemen are standing there not saying anything when they can see that this man is handcuffed. That's racism. Now, our whole lives, and this is white and black people, Our whole lives have dealt with that. And when we deal with the music, we deal with people who lived through this kind of stuff and had to be creative. I think about Duke Ellington and his band, and Count Basie and his band. And when they had female vocalists, and they're on the bus, before bathrooms on the bus, what they had to do to survive in playing performances throughout the South. And sometimes the South went as far as Canada. Okay? So it wasn't a demarcation that this is, you're in the South.
Yeah, I mean, just for the record, I want you to keep going. I don't think Canada had a color bar the way we do here.
No, I'm talking about geography-wise.
Got it, yeah.
That racism went as far as, it wasn't a Southern thing, it was America. And I mean, Missouri is in the middle of the United States. We don't think of Missouri necessarily as being in the South, but it is.
Sure.
Mentally for many people. And I heard on the news yesterday that there have been 11 people killed like this in Missouri over the years. So, I mean, we know that this is, been happening, and we don't bring it to fore. As M. Dume said, look at Rodney King. We all said the same thing. Oh, they got the police now. Look at him. Look at how he's beating him. And he's down, Well, here, this man is not fighting. Floyd is not fighting. And consequently, Jake, that's what makes the music more meaningful emotionally many times, because people have taken those kinds of situations and translated them into their music. You understand what I'm saying?
I'm loving it, man. There's just a lot of questions in my head. I mean, Larry Willis, another beautiful cat who I interviewed, he said, New York has lost its atmosphere for greatness. When I was coming along, guys could cohabitate in lofts and have rent parties to pay their rent.
Mm-hmm.
We would get together and jam and share what we were learning with one another. There was a vibrancy that came out of that nurtured the music. Now these lofts in these areas that used to cost $200 a month, these lofts are going for millions of dollars. He talked about Roy Campanella living in Harlem. Sugar Ray Robinson had a business. I guess my question for you is, when you were coming of age in New York City, a lot of what I hear from my peers, at least through the media, I don't have a lot of black friends, but what I can feel from them is that they don't live in a free society. They're constantly being watched. They're constantly under surveillance. And in some way, I'm trying to get to this question that Larry was talking about with this, you had African-American leaders living in communities like Harlem. Now they're all gentrified. The question is, did you feel, even with all the bravery of Ellington and countless, and Belafonte and all these cats, did you feel like you were being watched? Did you feel like you were being...
Man, I lived through this stuff, man. I worked with Lionel Hampton. I worked with Hank Crawford. And we stayed in the South. So I lived through this stuff. I lived through it from the standpoint of what my father taught me, who was not a musician. He was just a black man. And when I was coming up, I knew about all of this stuff. I read the books, We Charge Genocide. Okay? And I read and heard stories from musicians who were much older than me of what happened to them when they were on the road. All I can say is,
What can you give? What I mean, aside from, I know what you're saying. I mean, you had to be, if you went to a town, you had to be, you could only sleep in the black part of town. You couldn't sleep in the white part. But I mean, like, can you talk about the most? Did you have run-ins with the Klan? Did you experience murder?
No, not to my knowledge. But I had run-ins with white people that could have been the Klan, but they didn't have white hoods on. I mean, I just got off the telephone with Slide Hampton earlier.
Yeah.
Slide has not been well. He was in the hospital for a few days. And we talked about how we, the band, integrated Virginia Beach.
Can you please talk about that?
Virginia.
Can you please talk about that?
Yeah, we were working in a club on the boardwalk, but we couldn't stay in any of the hotels on the boardwalk. We had to stay in people's homes, okay? And we found out that the beach had been integrated by law 2 days before we arrived. Okay, here is 10 of us in the band. Three white guys. All right?
Yep.
4 white guys. Okay? Eddie Deal, guitar. Jay Cameron, baritone. Joe Farrell.
Wow.
And the drummer, Reznikov. No, not Reznikov. I forgot the drummer's name.
No, we got to get the drummer's name at some point.
Vinny, you know.
Vinny.
Okay?
Yeah.
So we decided to go down to the beach. Eddie Deal had his wife with him. So Eddie Deal was doing handstands in the sand. And his wife asked him to put on some suntan lotion.
Yeah.
So Eddie looked at his hands. He said, "Oh, Jimmy, can you put on the suntan lotion?" So his wife is white. She has on a bikini. And I said, "All right, no problem," you know. So I'm and all of a sudden the Slide Hampton said, "Hey, man, you should look behind you at the boardwalk." And I turned around and looked behind me, and there were about 100 people staring at us. So much so that when we went to the club that night, the owner of the club, it was called the Gaslight, the owner of the club says, "Hey, if you could go to the beach, go further down, you know, not near the club."
Jesus.
So, I mean, like...
What year was that?
This is, I would say, I must have been time around there. You know, I lived that part of that, in that even with Lionel Hampton, there were hotels when we were in the South that we couldn't stay in. Okay? There were hotels with Hank Crawford that we couldn't stay in places that we worked. Or we stayed in a black hotel if there was one in the city. Like Jackson, Mississippi had a black hotel. Baton Rouge, Louisiana had a black hotel. That's where we stayed. We stayed in Mobile, Alabama. We stayed there for about 3 months, worked out of Mobile. It was on a black-owned hotel. We couldn't stay in white hotels. And this is 1963. You know? So I'm aware of that, and I do feel that living through that stuff infused a certain amount of emotion into what I played on the trumpet all the time.
It's like living history.
And,
Yeah, no, it's, what, is it as simple to say that kids of color had instruments taken out of schools, so now they resorted to the next best thing, which is sampling and rapping? I mean,
oh yeah, well that's what basically happened.
Yeah, right.
Because there were no instruments in many schools. By the time I had come up and learned on the instruments in the junior high school, those instruments were not replaced when they broke, when they were stolen, whatever. So they started to beat their bodies, beatbox. They started to do all of the stuff to express themselves. I mean, and that's the ingenuity of a people. I mean, my father was born in 1911. He used to tell me how him and his brother, who was born in 13, would go out and dance. And his brother would take tin cans and tie them on his feet to tap. And that's how they would make money. That's the ingenuity. Right. And we as a people, black people, we've always had that. And that's why our music was great at that time. I recall, I love this record that I was called to do with Oliver Nelson and Louis Armstrong. It's an album that was me, Royal, Clark Terry, I think, and myself, Marvin Stamm in the trumpet section. And Louis Armstrong recorded a song called "This Black Cat's Got 9 Lives." And I loved it. And I listened to this record every now and then. You got to check it out.
Well, no, I mean, it's called Louis. Do you remember the name of the album?
Louis Armstrong, yeah.
And his friends.
Hello, everybody. I think it's Hello, everybody.
It's Ernie Royal, Jimmy Owens, Ernie Royal, Marvin Stamm, and Thad Jones.
Yeah, Thad Jones. Okay.
Holy
cow. Thad was on it, right?
I mean, Jimmy, I could talk to you for 9 hours. There's a couple things I wanted to just talk to you about. Glenn Moore, who is a bass player with the band Oregon, he said that, I just want to get the quote up here, but he basically said, I wanted to ask you about individual sound as it relates to when things were in mono. How did detecting somebody's individual sound change from going from mono to stereo sound?
A sound. Johnny Hodges' sound was Johnny Hodges' sound, that it didn't matter if it was mono or stereo. It mattered only because technology got better and the sound got clearer for people to hear, but it didn't affect Johnny Hodges' sound, because every time he pulled out his instrument, he projected that sound that was in his head, in his ear, in his heart. And we can deal with a lot of musicians like that. I talk about Ben Webster the same way.
Right.
Well,
this is the exact quote. He said, this was before stereo, so anybody, this is like 1959 in Oregon. Mm-hmm. He said, so anybody who played this is specifically related to the piano, I should be clear about that.
Okay.
This was before stereo, so anybody who played the piano had a completely distinctive sound. There was no homogenizing of sound, which was the effect of stereo. In those days, the people I was listening to music with really believed if you knew a player, you should be able to recognize his playing within 8 bars, just from the touch. Errol Gardner actually had music on the radio then. I loved him.
Right.
I'm just, because a lot of people were like, I put this quote up the other day on Facebook. People say, I don't understand. How did the change from mono to stereo create homogenization of sound? And that to me makes more sense on the piano going from the acoustic to the Fender Rhodes.
Yeah.
But I'm just talking about,
But-
yeah, go ahead.
No, but just the piano. Just think about it. Okay. Teddy
Wilson.
Wilson, and take Thelonious Monk. There are years between them, but the same piano. Teddy Wilson would sit down at that piano and play it, and he would sound like Teddy Wilson. And Thelonious Monk would sit down at that same piano and play it, and he would sound like Thelonious Monk. The touch is different.
Right.
The way they push down the keys is different. Now, you can tell that right now. I listened to someone, and I said, this is earlier this morning. I said, oh, damn, that's strange that they're playing 2 records that Kenny Barron is on. The first one was Mysterioso with the violinist. And the second record was Jeremy Pelt's record, and Kenny Barron was on it. And I'm listening. I said, well, damn, that's Kenny Barron playing piano. I didn't hear them announce anything. I could tell by the touch. I remember years ago, Herbie Hancock, because I studied with Donald Byrd.
Yes.
And when Herbie first came to New York, he stayed with Donald Byrd up in the Bronx. I remember Herbie Hancock one time saying, oh, yeah, that's an F and an A flat, And I said to him, you have perfect pitch? He said, no. I could just tell the sound of the piano. I wondered about that at the time. He wasn't near the piano, but he could tell the sound of the piano what the note was. And as time went on, I started to discover, hey, I can do the same thing with trumpet. When somebody's playing the trumpet, I could tell who it is by how they're playing the trumpet, as well as how they are projecting their sound. Sound is something that is amazing, and that's what is one of the wonders of this music, because the masters of this music all projected a sound, a different sound.
Well, I just want to be clear. Herbie was listening to what was he hearing?
He was listening to someone play a piano.
So he was hearing the piano, but he was able to just pick out a note based on the way it was being projected?
It was how they projected that note, that phrase. And he made a comment on what the notes were.
If you were just talking to very hungry seekers of music, musicians, Mundell Lowe, rest in peace. When I interviewed him, he said, Jake, people try very hard to teach jazz, but you can't teach jazz. Because it's an expression ultimately of your own life, and then being able to honestly express that amongst a small group or whatever. But what are the things that you learned the most about essence, pulse, tension and release, and spiritual music that you could never learn in the academy?
How to project emotion.
Dude, how do you unlock somebody's emotional if they have so much armor around it? I mean, the sores and the wounds of I mean, that stuff was so visceral. You had to stay on the black side of town. You had to stay in Sunbeam Mitchell's hotel for 3 months in Memphis because there was nowhere else to go. Emotions would build up, and so how do you unlock emotions, especially now in a time when people are more intimate with machines and smartphones than they are with actual people?
I don't know. It's something about emotional projection that is so powerful that it comes through.
Yeah, I dig.
You can feel someone's emotion by what they play and how they play it, whatever instrument it is. You know? And it's not something that you teach yourself. It's something that is innate. It comes about from you listening, you being a part of something that's happening, your life experiences. The life experiences that you lead, they have an effect on everything that comes out of your instrument. You know, I believe that. And if you have wide experience, then you're going to have possibly wide experience from the standpoint of what you project on your instrument.
One final question for you, sir. Actually, two questions. I struggle because just because of my point of view, I tend to think that we are all one human race, and that
we are.
Well, but yeah, the harder, trickier question is, even though I've been brainwashed by Western media towards this term racism, if we're one human race, I find that racism is an impossibility. It's actually cultural bias, meaning you grow up in cultures that teach to hate. No baby is born to hate. So we use this term racism, and I look at it more as cultural bias, and I wonder where you come down on that. And also, please talk about your musical and personal relationship with the late, great Jimmy Cobb.
We just played together in November, and Reggie Workman was on it. You know, he may not have mentioned anything about that.
No. That's what blew him away. Because he had just played with Jimmy.
Right. This was a concert we do every year at Flushing Town Hall in New York, in Queens. It's a celebration of the NEA Jazz Masters, and it was put together by Jimmy Heath. Okay? This was the first year ever cancer. And we called him and put him up on the screen for the public to see. And it was a great group. Joanne Brackeen played piano. She took Barry Harris's place because Barry was sick in Italy and was not going to be able to come out of the hospital and come back and play. You know, so Joanne Brackeen, Reggie Workman, and Jimmy Cobb, and it was a wonderful concert. Me and Paquito de Rivera.
Yeah, that what Reggie said was he knew he could tell that Jimmy wasn't totally right, but
Right.
he said it still felt good.
Yep. And I mean, like I had been noticing that every year I had seen him go down. You know, and I'll tell you this story about Jimmy was teaching at the new school, and I went into the office one day. This was a number of years ago, 10 years ago or so, and he was in the office, and I said, "Hey man, I want to ask you a question. Do you remember playing with Miles at Small's Paradise on a Sunday matinee, and Miles let this little kid sit in with the band?" And he says, "Yeah, I remember that." I said, "Oh, man, you bullshitting. You don't remember that. I mean, that's 1958, man." He said, "I remember that because that was my first week, the end of my first week with Miles. And I looked over at the bar, and Philly Joe Jones was standing at the bar, and I got so nervous." And I was saying to myself, you know, at that point, I've been a professional for many years, and we had played together many times. I said to myself, he got nervous. Why would he get nervous with Philly Joe Jones? Yes, he took Philly Joe Jones's place a week ago, but still, he was a professional. He had been a professional, you know, and that just made me think about it. I said, wow, that's the kind of respect that he had for Philly Joe Jones and what Philly Joe did with Miles. You know?
I just want to be clear about something. I want to be clear. Well, yeah, it's the respect. It's the respect for the music. It's the respect for the history and the people that came. But were you the kid, or there was just another? You were in the
I was the kid.
You were the kid. I knew it. You were the freaking kid.
Miles. Yeah, Miles. I was looking at his trumpet. I mean, they were on a break. And I was looking at his trumpet in the piano. I had never seen a blue-tinted trumpet.
Wow.
So somebody sat down at the piano and started to play some chords. I looked, and it was Miles. And he looked up at me and said, "You play trumpet, kid?" I said, "Yeah." So he reached over and handed me his trumpet and said, "Play me a tune." So I was going to take the mouthpiece. I said, "Take the mouthpiece." He said, "What you could do, play without a mouthpiece?" I said, No, I got my own. So he took his mouthpiece out. I put my mouthpiece in, and I played Walking. Ba-be-doo-doo-boop-be-doo-doo-boop-boo-doo-boo. And the rest of the band was coming on the bandstand. Paul Chambers, Jimmy Cobb, Cannonball Adderley, John Coltrane. And finally, the last person to come on was Bill Evans. So Miles said to him, "Hey, man, you hear this kid play?" And Bill Evans said, "No." And he gave me the trumpet again and said, "Play it again." So I started to play Walking, and the band came in. And they played with me.
That was. How old? You were 10 years old? How old were you?
I was 14.
Okay, we just spent 92 minutes, and the essence of my show and the love that I try to exude through this show was epitomized in that incredible story.
Yeah, well, so Jimmy and myself have talked about that many times over the years, you know, and that was a wonderful experience for me because then I got to become friendly with Miles, and every time I would go see him, he would, ask me, "You got a corn yet on my lip?" And he said, "How's your father?" Because my father had taken me to Small's Paradise to see the matinee. And then, after I played that, he said, "Play another one." and I played Bag's Groove.
Wait, you're saying live at Smalls? You were on. He asked you to play another track, another tune. With the band.
With the band. Now I don't recall. I really have to say honestly, I don't recall if they stretched out the song.
Right.
So Cannonball and Train would solo on it.
Oh man.
I think they, took it out after I finished my solo. But that was a wonderful.
Do you remember?
situation.
No. Do you remember if it was just you that blew on those tunes, or was it definitely?
That's what I was just saying.
You don't remember if there was other
Okay. If they took a solo on that or not.
My God.
I mean, but those were two songs that were in Miles's repertoire at that time. Walking, which he had recorded in '54. So they would play Walking, and they would probably play Bag's Groove also. So they may have, taken a solo or something. I guess I was just so dumbfounded being up there to play with those particular musicians.
Well, it just after a while, it was like a dream conceived, but a lot of times in dreams you don't remember all the details, but you do know that it actually happened.
Then I found out the date because it was a book.
Oh my God! Don't even say that there's a recording of it out there.
Oh no! I wish there was.
Me too, man.
So I could hear all the wrong notes.
There are no wrong notes. You know that.
But a book came out on Miles. I think it's called Milestones or something like that. And in the book, it lists his various gigs. And there in 1958, at Small's Paradise, and I think it was June 15th, the date. 1958. Then I saw him in July. I went to a concert up in the Bronx. I lived in the Bronx at a place, and it was Curtis Fuller, Hank Mobley, and Kenny Dorham. And Kenny Dorham, I used to always go speak to the musicians, and they started to know me.
Oh, I love it.
And Kenny Dorham let me play his trumpet, and Miles was in the audience. Miles and his wife had gone to that concert. It was a jazz barbecue.
The leader was Kenny Dorham?
It was the three of them, and I have pictures of that.
That is heavy stuff, yeah.
I have pictures of me and Hank Mobley and me and Curtis Fuller playing from that night, that afternoon, July 15th, 1958.
Okay, real quick, as honestly as you can, based on the cultural bias that exists in this country, I'm going to list four guys, and then I'm going to ask you a question, because you just mentioned the Sun's Tan Lotion story with Eddie in Virginia Beach, and Joe Farrell was in that band, and so I'm not. But
Jay Cameron.
But Mike Knock, Joe Zawino, Miroslav Vichuis, and Airto. Okay, I've interviewed them. I've interviewed a bunch of guys. Heiner Stadler you played with. Is it fair to say that black musicians were more accepting of immigrants playing their music than white American musicians?
I never thought about that.
They say that they all felt incredible love. Every one of them has told stories about being completely accepted by you guys. In fact, Airto came to the States and was rejected. He was from obviously Brazil, and he spoke Portuguese and Spanish. And he started going to these salsa clubs in the late '60s, around the time you were getting your professional career going. And they said, no, you can't play. You can shake your shaker in the corner there, but you can't be on stage. Of course, the guys that brought him in, Walter Booker, Roy McCurdy, Miles loved him, loved what he. Same thing with Miroslav. It was, to me, I know you probably didn't think about it, but it's fascinating with all the cats that I've interviewed who came here from overseas, who were listening to free American radio, Jan Hammer, all these guys. They were complete. Mike Knock was playing in Harlem with all these black cats. It was interesting zone. And again, these were guys that were playing this original American music, and seemingly totally accepted by.
I have to tell you, I accepted anyone that I played with that could play. And Jan Hammer could play his ass off. And Joe Zawinul could play his ass off. And Miroslav Vitos could play his ass off. So consequently, I accepted them immediately. I didn't know anything about them being an immigrant. Yeah, so this person came from someplace else. I would wonder, damn, how did he learn how to play like that? Well, they listened to the records. They copied the records. They learned all of the stuff. And I was always amazed, but I wasn't amazed to say, well, this person is from, Austria. Hey, man, I'm sure Cannonball had a hell of a time playing in some of the black areas that he played in, and this white pianist was playing piano. And people would go and see Cannonball in the band, and this white pianist playing, and they say, "Oh, what the fuck is this? He have a white pianist for?" Until Joe Zawinul started to play,
right?
And then it was the end of that. Hey, man, he was just another great musician along with Cannonball and that. That's all that mattered to those people at that time. I think about him working out in California. Or
well, I mean, dude, the seminal band, Jimmy. You were shedding heart. You were doing your thing, I think, in New York. But I mean, Cannon's band in '73 was Walter Booker and Roy McCurdy, George Duke on piano. Then you start to get into the One Human Race. You had Ernie Watts, who's Native American blood. You had Buck Clark, African drummer. Airto is a Brazilian drummer, and Mike Dacey, white Christian studio cat, and Nat and Cannon. The nasty, and that band is on live recording Black Messiah. You want to talk about humanity at the forefront, most burning album, and it's the most and there's a picture of them on the front, and they're all like looking like hippies. It's one of the funny.
And I have to say, most of us, the black musicians that had another color musician or another person from another heritage, we never, put it this way, I never, and everyone that I know, they never thought about that person as being different. They just thought about that person as being a hellified musician. Okay? And that's what made the difference.
Yeah, I only ask because going back to Big Black or John Hendricks, when I talk to these guys, is truly your music. And then it seemed to me it seemed to them that white corporate owners of record companies wanted to come in and monetize your music. So they were I'm not, not necessarily the players themselves. There was clearly, the stories that I have from these immigrants about being accepted, it just breaks my heart. It breaks my heart that how accepting you guys were of, and how open you were to just whether they could play or not. End of story. Versus heinous
Okay, let me just
bigotry
tell
and
you one little
yeah,
last story.
yeah, do it.
You just mentioned Larry Willis.
The man.
So Larry Willis calls me. This must be 1960. Larry went to the High School of Music and Art. He graduated a year before I did. I graduated in 61. Okay? So Larry calls me and says, hey, listen, there's going to be a jam session, and there's a new trumpet player that Harry Belafonte just brought in from South Africa. I said, oh, really? He says, yeah, we're going to have this jam session up at Paul Chambers' house. So he says, this is the address. It was up someplace on 92nd Street. So I go, and the trumpet player is Hugh Masekela.
Absolutely.
And so we're having a jam session. We play some blues, and somebody says, let's play Green Dolphin Street. Well, Hugh Masekela doesn't know Green Dolphin Street. So we sat there, we taught him Green Dolphin Street so we could play it. You know, we started to play it and says, okay, well, it's F chord and it's going to F minor 7, you know, and then G major 7 and F sharp. And we tell him the chords like that, and he remembers them and plays. And that was both of our introductions to Hugh Masekela. You know. And he went to Manhattan School of Music with Larry Willis.
Yeah, him and Miriam Makeba, I mean, I think Dizzy was instrumental in helping them get over here to begin with.
Right.
Jimmy, well, you know, for all those that have left us from this virus and all those that are not feeling great now, what is your message to them about your love and the ability to keep the legacy? I mean, just that essence of Jimmy Cobb seeing Philly Joe and being not in fear, but wanting to be respectful of the chair that he inherited, and just all the eclectic, wild leaders that drove this music at the time when you were coming up to its popular heights. I mean, what's the message for all your brothers and sisters?
Well, right now, I would say with this virus, for the group of musicians that have died because of the virus, the Wallace Roneys, the Mike Longos,
Ellis Marsalis, yeah.
Ellis, and the whole list of them, I would say that it was really devastating to this music of ours that they disappeared like that. And I would say that all of the hard work that I have done along with others over the last 25 years in establishing the Jazz Foundation of America to help musicians in need. I just am very happy that we have done that since 1989. And I feel sorry for those musicians who have no pension if they're old enough to receive a pension. And this pandemic has stopped them from working the world over. I feel very, very sad about that. And I'm happy that the Jazz Foundation of America could have come to the assistance of a number of musicians to help them with living, bills paid, all of that.
How do people find out? Let me just ask you. I mean, it's labeled the Jazz Foundation of America.
America.
Does it? Do you? How do you qualify for that? Is it only for people that are in that aesthetic?
No, it's for jazz and blues players.
Dig.
Okay.
How do people find information on it?
It's 1-212 245 3999. That's the telephone number.
I just want to be clear. 212-245-3999. Got it. Jazz.
Okay. Foundation of America. And it's there to help jazz artists. And we've helped numerous jazz artists. And it's all confidential. The only time we talk about somebody is if they decided that they wanted to tell people.
Dig.
And Freddie Hubbard told people how we came to his aid after he had a heart attack and paid his mortgage for 3 or 4 months. And Cecil Payne once talked about how he had no food whatsoever. And Reverend Genzel, John Genzel from St. Peter's Church, bought a bunch of food for him, and John Genzel was on the board of directors, along with myself, bought a bunch of food and took it to Cecil Payne's house to give to him. We've helped with paying back rent, telephone bills, all that kind of stuff. We have a hospital that we work with, Dizzy Gillespie's hospital, where he would always go,
right,
in Englewood, New Jersey.
Yeah, he
gave
Bill Cosby his mouthpiece.
Well, they have been working with us for many years. They have spent, I think, about $7 million in free hospital treatments for jazz and blues artists. Okay? So this is something that goes on and on. And we have a wonderful board of directors that brings in lots of money. Matter of fact, our major fundraiser every year was at the Apollo Theater that had to be canceled this year.
Wow.
But we just did 3 days of Zoom fundraiser by playing various concerts that we had and performances of artists who wanted to perform for the people. So that's one of the things that I'm very, very proud of that I've been involved with, and I actually started the Jazz Musician Emergency Fund back in 1989, along with Jamil Nasser. And later on, Bob Cranshaw came in.
Wow. Is Jamil still with us?
No, he's not.
Okay. And do you have to?
You should get his book.
Well, I'm still. I just need to hear
It's a wonderful book about his life.
Yeah, his bass playing with Ahmad is incredible. Do you have to, just one thing? Do you have to have been professionally? Is there any criteria to apply for aid? I mean,
Well, we started with, we would help people, professional jazz musicians who are 50 and over, but can't pay their bills. So we help anyone now. Anyone who is a professional jazz or blues artist. The Jazz Foundation of America.
Jimmy Owens, thank you for healing me today and for dropping some knowledge.
Thank you for asking great questions.
After 9 years, I hope I'm pretty good at it. It was great, man.
All right.
All right, be cool, man. Be safe, and
Next time.
till next time.
Yeah, send me an email or something when I could listen to this.
Oh, when I put it up as a podcast tonight, I'll send you the link.
Okay.
All right.
That's good.
All right, my man.
All right.
Much love to
All
you,
right.
man. Take it easy.
Talk to you. This is my cell phone that you're calling, so you can text me.
Absolutely. Oh, I will. Thank you, Jimmy.
Okay?
Yep.
All right.
Later.
Bye-bye.
Be cool. A titan of music and humanity. We can only hope. This is it for the Jake Feinberg Show. See you tomorrow.